Now, welcome to another edition of Battle of the Heroes and Villains, where this time we'll be taking a look at the results of the poll for Galen Merrick, also known as Starkiller. We'll then compare those results to all the other characters we've done thus far, before I then read and respond to some of your comments. But before getting to all that, you can already head down and nominate or vote for which character we should do next by responding to my pinned comment down there, or voting with a thumbs up if the one you'd like to see is already listed. Whatever single comment gets the most votes in the next 24 hours or so will be the winner and the character we do next. Alright, and now on to the results for Galen Merrick, where we'll see that 34% of voters think he is an A tier character, 45% went with a B, 15% thought him about average and gave him a C, which left 3% to give him a D, and a final 3% to give him an F. And so when we do all the math here and consider A a score of 5 and F a score of 1, Galen Merrick ends up with an average score of 4.04, which puts him into a tie for 23rd with both C3PO and Cad Bane. But since the tiebreaker is percentage of A votes received, that means the order will be 3PO, Galen Merrick, and then Cad Bane. Okay, and before getting to your comments, let me once again say thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches these videos. It is all greatly appreciated, and it's also a lot of fun. Also, a big thank you to everyone who supports this channel over on Patreon. And if you like what I do here and want to support me as well, a link to my Patreon is in the description below. And it will get you access to my Discord server where we're always talking some Star Wars. Alright, and now let's kick this off, as we always do, with the top-rated comment, which this time came to us from Veterlit Torf, who said, I give him an A. At the time, the creation of Galen Merrick, aka Starkiller, and his character arc was unique in Star Wars visual media. He's the only character who was raised in the dark side that went to the light. Of course, this had already happened in EU books, but not everyone reads those. So at the time, for a lot of fans, his story was unique and interesting. Plus, a lot of those same fans don't particularly give a damn about power scaling. That being said, unfortunately, a lot of people give him flack for being seemingly overpowered, which has sort of become Starkiller's most iconic trait. However, it should be noted that most of his OP moments were merely game mechanics and should not be taken too seriously. As Merrick's voice actor, Sam Witwer, said, what we see in the game is essentially a campfire story to make things more exciting, but based on the comics and the game's novelization, Merrick did not pull down a Star Destroyer from the sky. He merely took a Star Destroyer that was already about to crash and redirected it into the ore cannon. He did not ragdoll Darth Vader around either. He merely used his familiarity with his former master and wore him down with Force Lightning and Force Speed, which were among Vader's few weaknesses. Starkiller was indeed a powerhouse, but nothing out of the ordinary. After all, as Kreia once said, nothing is impossible to the Force. Even Yoda confirmed that nothing is too big or too small to the Force. As such, I see no reason why Galen Merrick shouldn't be celebrated as a multi-layered, tragic character with a heart of gold who never knew love and happiness until the end, and whose death becomes Palpatine's eventual undoing, revealing his true power over the Empire. Galen Merrick is indeed a symbol of redemption, and his inspiring story of self-discovery is a reminder that there is always hope for anyone, even those who were raised in the darkness. Okay, so first of all, I think this is the longest top-rated comment we've ever had before, which is not a complaint or anything. It's actually very impressive, because usually what tends to win top honors is something more sort of quick-witted and to the point and just hits on something that most everyone can agree with in a sentence or two. And so the fact that such a long comment won, when people I think usually skip reading the long ones, is a testament to just how well said this all was, that it encapsulates pretty much everything I'd want to touch on in a video about Starkiller, because I do think the main discussion around him is always that he's OP or overpowered, and certainly other Star Wars characters, especially a more recent one that I think we can all think of, has been heavily criticized for being overpowered. But I think the big thing that has to be remembered with Starkiller is that he's primarily a character from a game. That's where most people are going to know him from. So of course he's going to be powered up when compared to the average character in order to make the game more entertaining or fun to play, for the player to be able to do somewhat crazy things with the Force that they only dreamed of before. I mean, the game is even called The Force Unleashed, so of course this is going to be very much an action-oriented game that probably goes a bit over the top. Though, as pointed out in the comment, if you read the books or the comics, he's toned down quite a bit, or some of the truly crazy things he does are further explained. And I think Sam Witwer's explanation that it's a campfire story to make things more exciting is the perfect way to put it, and goes along with something I've said before, or how I rectify certain sort of inconsistencies in stories at times, which is that everything in Star Wars is being told secondhand, and that at times things can be either embellished or even watered down to fit any given audience. The Force Unleashed, for example, is designed for those who, again, want to control a powerful Jedi and do some really cool things. It plays to that audience, so the quote-unquote real story of Starkiller is embellished at points to make for a more exciting game for people to play. Again, it's like someone telling a tall tale or maybe a scary story around a campfire that maybe has some degree of truth to it. It's just embellished for the particular situation it's being told in. However, a bit on the flip side, something like Rebels perhaps is watered down because it's intended for a much younger audience. Maybe the quote-unquote, again, real story of Rebels is much darker at points, or maybe there's more tragedy than we ever get to see in the show. Maybe a more adult version of Rebels would even delve more into the relationship between Hera and Kanan, and clearly something was going on behind the scenes since we see their child at the very end of the story. Alright, let's now move on to this comment from Inspector Who Reacts, who said, Starkiller / Galen is probably one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars. He's a man who mostly grew up with the dark side, literally had to survive what Vader threw at him, until he finally became an official apprentice, and even then, he wasn't spared the risk of death. While in the game he appears OP, the novel actually makes it seem Starkiller was more lucky. All the Jedi he fought kept him on the back foot until he found an opening. Also, being the title name, we rarely ever see the Force used in such extreme ways until this game. Starkiller is kind of showing what happens when you don't hold back with the Force. Then we also have this one from Mattis Kesimo, who said, I gave him an F. Though his story is pretty good, it's not the best in my opinion, and the fact that his power was so insane for seemingly no reason gave me too much Rey vibes. And I don't know, I think there's actually a pretty decent explanation for his power, though not quite to the extent we see in the game where he's literally ripping Star Destroyers out of the sky. But again, like I was saying before, we have to keep in mind that this is supposed to be a really fun, over-the-top game, and where the story is told in other mediums, he's not quite so powerful. But anyway, he is already the child of Force users and was trained by none other than Darth Vader himself for around 20 years, so there is a very good reason in story why he is a very talented Force user, though maybe he shouldn't be quite that talented. Not to mention, being overpowered doesn't automatically mean you can't be a good or even a great character. I've said it before, I'll say it again here, but I would have been far more okay with Rey being overpowered if there was both a good explanation for it, and it was actually something that threatened her, or the dark side threatened to consume her because she didn't know how to use this vast amount of power that had been suddenly thrust upon her. But anyway, let's stay on target and get to this comment from Michael Crawford, who said, The Force Unleashed 2 is like Fight Club. We don't talk about it. Then there's this one from Jared Locke, who said, I don't count Force Unleashed 2. That game was horrendous, so when I only look at Force Unleashed 1, he's fantastic, and Sam Witwer is the man. Okay, so I probably should have made it clear when posting the poll that we were only talking about the Galen Merrick from the first game, not the clone we see in The Force Unleashed 2. They are, in my opinion, two very different characters. However, I don't think that would have affected the poll too much or the results too much. I don't think too many people were confused or thinking they are one and the same. Alright, and moving on now, we have this comment from Luke Mitchell, who said, Finally, it's been weeks if not months of coming in second. Finally. A tier. I loved his story in the first game. But he just does so much more for Darth Vader's character as well, where Vader actually had him convinced that they were going to destroy Palpatine, and that what he was doing was the right thing. Just goes to show how manipulative he really was. Shakti also told him that the Sith always betray one another. And the fact that he goes from a living weapon and ends up the catalyst for the rebellion is just amazing. His story had me hooked from start to finish. Also, if you look at him being Vader's apprentice and Ahsoka being Anakin's, they both show externally Anakin's internal conflict. I just wish Disney could bring him back into canon somehow, even though they would have to nerf him a lot. And though I'm not really exactly sure how they'd bring his story into the new canon, considering there are already some contradictions of it in place, but I'd love to see a version of it happen somehow, and for a lot of the reasons you touch on here. First, it does add a whole new layer to Vader, showing that, like any good Sith, he was always scheming and plotting and planning to take over the Master Sith role. That it wasn't just a matter of being a good boy the whole time under Palpatine until, oh look, I have a son and maybe now I should start thinking about taking down my master. Hell, even Anakin was saying to Padme way back in Revenge of the Sith that I could overthrow the Chancellor, I'm more powerful than him. So Starkiller goes along with this idea that it's always been in the back of Vader's mind that he should be the one ruling. Second of all, I do think it's fitting that both Anakin and Vader, as you kind of pointed out, would have apprentices that are responsible to some degree for the rise of the rebellion that would defeat the empire he helped bring about. That's very much some poetry that rhymes, as George Lucas might say. Okay, now time for just a few final comments before wrapping this up, starting with this one from Spooky Stone, who said, absolutely one of my all-time favorite Star Wars characters. His story is one of tragedy and then redemption, mirroring Vader's in a way. The games were a staple of my childhood. Overall, I give him a very strong B. Then there's this one from Skylar2000, who said, people don't remember him for being a good character. His story isn't bad. I enjoyed it. People remember getting to be an overpowered badass Sith. Next up is this one from Nerdist Justin, who said, he is an A for me. I loved the first game and his progression from covert Sith assassin to redeemed Jedi, who inadvertently helped create the rebellion, was fantastic. The second game wasn't very good, unfortunately. I would love if they made a live action movie about him and making the events of the first game canon again. It was so good, and the actor could still pull it off. Then there's also this one from Joshua Melton, who said, I gave him a B because he was a unique character in the Star Wars lore. His backstory of being raised by Darth Vader as a secret apprentice, to ultimately his redemption arc and sacrificing his life to save others. As a way to honor him, they used his family crest as the symbol of the rebellion. I would love to see a Disney Plus series about him. We also then have this one from Joel Pierce, who said, Vader, your feelings for her are not real. Galen, they are real to me. If you didn't hear that in the characters' voices, you didn't play the games. Edit, I fixed Vader's quote in case this comment makes the video. Moving on, we also have this one from Fulcrum Studios, who said, he was my first introduction to the EU. I loved how even though he knew nothing but darkness, he still redeemed himself, and without him, the original trilogy wouldn't have played out the way it did. A for me. We also then have this one from Wesley Marsh, who said, I give Starkiller an A because he was a surprisingly well thought out character, and his backstory of being raised by a Jedi Purge survivor to becoming Vader's secret apprentice and ultimately the founder of the Rebel Alliance was both thrilling and tragic. Not to mention the game itself being some incredibly fun Star Wars content. And finally here we have this comment from Michigan1777, who said, I would give him an A. I feel like he is what Anakin would have been without getting decimated by Obi-Wan. I love how he truly shows that a Darksider's compassion is more complex than just passion. I think out of most characters in the universe, he is the most human-like with his emotions. He is essentially the precursor to Ahsoka's depth, but really shows the power capabilities of a truly great Force user. It's almost like he's a collaboration of several characters' personalities all wrapped up into one. He has the courage of Luke, the passion of Anakin, the emotion of Ahsoka, the power of Yoda/Sidious, and the combat abilities/smarts of someone like Obi-Wan or Maul. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of Galen Merrick, or what you think of what I or anyone else had to say about him here in this video. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.